Welcome back to Earth Station Trek, a show where we trek from the early days on NBC to the future on Paramount Plus and everywhere in between. I'm Charles Kelso, and it's my privilege to introduce the Earth Station Trek crew. Keith Johnson.
Come fly with me. Come fly with me. Hey.
Alan Seiler.
Bada boom, bada bing.
And Veronica Dashel.
Hi.
Now I want to hear Vic say hi.
And we thought we'd kick it off this week like we always do this time of year by talking about the big news out of Paramount for Star Trek Day.
Well, that didn't take long.
This is the lightest Star Trek Day we've had, since we've been doing the podcast.
Yeah, it kind of came and went, didn't it?
Yeah, there was a clip from Lower Decks.
Right.
And then a Facebook post saying, "How does Star Trek inspire you?" That was about it.
Yeah, this was super something.
Well, instead of that, how about we announce some big news of ours for the show? We can have our own Star Trek Day.
Yeah, bunk start Paramount.
That's right. So, Alan, what is the big Earth Station Trek news?
The big for us?
Yes.
I don't know which one you want to go with first.
Well, let's go with the book first.
Okay, let's do that. Okay, so the big news is that we are collectively writing a book together. It is called The Earth Station Trek Guide to Star Trek.
That's right.
This is going to be a collection of essays that we will be writing, episode reviews, all kinds of things. I've got all kinds of things planned going into this. It's going to be super fun. And our plan is to have it ready to go next April.
Mm-hmm.
Why next April, Chuck?
That's the next piece of big news because we're both involved in a new sci-fi convention that's coming to Atlanta. This is like it's a fan-run convention. Mm-hmm. This is not a Comic-Con. It's not a Dragon Con. It's not you're going to come there and meet Anson Mount and William Shatner. This is like an old school, like fan-run sci-fi convention called Stellar Fest that I have been asked to run the Star Trek track for. Woo! And Alan, what are you doing there?
I will be running the Doctor Who track.
That's right.
What?
Man, I'm excited about this.
And we're going to be next door. Our track rooms are next door from each other. So
yeah, separated by an air wall. So you know that we'll be opening that baby up and doing something together.
Yeah. And absolutely that you'll see some familiar faces of voices that you've heard on Earth Station Trek because I've already been contacting like all my friends through Earth Station Trek, like come do a panel, come do something. Right. It's going to be fun. It's going to be a fun time. And I love the fact that it's a small fan run. There's no guests. It's just fans.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because Veronica and I, when we got involved in Felt Nerdy, like our big thing was we were doing puppet shows for little local sci-fi conventions. Wholand or Trek, what was it called? Timegate originally. Wholanta, Treklanta, which was originally Treks Atlanta. Like we spent probably the first several years that we were doing puppet shows. We were doing like 15 puppet shows a year at at sci-fi conventions. Wow. And we loved them. And then during the pandemic, we sort of fell away from doing that. So the fact that we get out and it's just going to be fans talking about things that they love and doing little shows and that kind of thing. It's going to be a great time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it really is. And for anybody in the audience who may have attended another local Atlanta convention, is called Conjuration, which is sort of the fantasy side of this whole thing. It is mainly magic fantasy. They do programming around Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, all those kind of things, Labyrinth, that kind of stuff. So this is the opposite side. This is the science fiction side. So there will be tracks devoted to Star Wars, obviously Star Trek and Doctor Who, and some other things. And these two cons are run by the same people. So if you have enjoyed Conjuration, Chris and Angela Seckinger do a fabulous job on that convention every year. And that's the team behind Stellar Fest. So if you love one, you're going to love the other.
Yeah, my camera got all wonky. So
Yo,
we were at a weird angle. I know. I'm making it worse.
How long has Stellar Fest been in the making? How long have they been talking about it and then decided to make it real?
Well, I think for me, I heard about it this year, April.
Okay.
Maybe it was a little later than that. It may have been Mayish or something. At that time, they did not have a venue. They didn't have, project date. They didn't even have a name for. Well, actually, no, they did have a name for it. They had come up with that already.
Okay.
So yes, and then of course. Oh wait, you can't. There you go. We will be releasing our book that weekend. So have cash in hand. Come ready to buy this. It'll be fun. I've got my first chapter written for it already. I've got like 6 chapters in my head. So I know exactly what I'm going to be writing. But the first one's done, and it's not what anybody will have expected.
When I saw the announcements we talked about last week, the other night, I texted Charles. I said, hell, I better start really writing now.
Absolutely correct.
We've pushed the release date back a few times, just because we all have other commitments and things like that. But I'm working on a chapter right now that's, I mean, it's probably the most personal thing I've ever written for public consumption.
Wow.
And also about Star Trek Discovery, which I think would probably not be the thing that people would expect me to go to first. But yeah, I think this is going to be a great opportunity for us. People listen to us all the time. I say people listen to us all the time. I like to think people listen to us all the time. But, this will be us from a little bit of a different perspective and our unique perspectives on Star Trek.
Yeah.
And how it relates to our lives.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And also at Stellar Fest, there is going to be something special happening in the Doctor Who track.
Okay.
I'm not going to say what it is yet because we haven't announced it yet.
Oh, I want to know.
But so the big thing happening in the track is our new book. The big thing happening in the Doctor Who track will be announced soon.
Awesome.
Ooh.
Yeah, and there's going to be some other things happening in the track. We're working on a show that I don't want to announce yet. It's not puppetry. It's something totally different that we've never done before.
Ooh.
That if you like Star Trek, I think that you will really enjoy. But it's a really exciting thing that we're in the works on.
Well, I doubt
Go ahead.
I doubt anybody listening to this show likes Star Trek.
So if they liked it when they started this podcast, we're gonna fix that.
You should just leave it out there because people can guess. Like I'm thinking, let me guess, it's a Cirque du Soleil Star Trek show.
Yeah, we can do that.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah,
I'm learning acrobatics as we speak.
The folks that run Conjuration, they have had a circus group that comes and does those kind of things. I mean, they have crazy stuff going on. They have a tap dancing group and all kinds of things. And they have this circus group that do tumbling and I don't even know what all, but crazy stuff. So we could get them to theme something around.
That's a great idea, Alan. The tap dancing. We could have a section called Charles Will Do It, and we could donate and have Charles do whatever we ask, like tap
get wild.
Yeah, like tap dance.
That would be amazing. And it would be donation for Vic's Lounge.
Yes. And if we could get them, the tap dancing group, to do something called the Dancing Beverleys or something like that. Chris and Angela, I hope you realize we're planning your whole convention for you right here, right now.
Go check out stellarfest.org. There's an application thing where if you want to be involved with panels and things like that. But if you have additional questions and stuff, I mean, shoot me a message if you want to get involved with the Star Trek panel, and I'll help guide you in. Because I'm really looking forward to. I mean, I've never done this before. I've been at a lot of conventions as a performer. So I think I bring a little bit of a different perspective than some folks who run tracks. But I'm looking forward to it, and I'm looking forward to the challenge and really just hanging out with my friends for a weekend. And I want to thank Veronica because we went to the original. Al and I were both there at the meeting, and I found out the dates. And that weekend is not only First Contact Day, but also Veronica's 40th birthday. And I was like, oh no, what if she doesn't want to spend her 40th birthday at a sci-fi convention? I might not be able to do this. So immediately I left and told her when it was, and you were all in. You were excited.
I was like, okay, cool. We're going to have my 40th party at a sci-fi convention.
Yeah. Veronica was like, why wouldn't I want to spend my 40th birthday at a sci-fi convention? Sounds great.
People will actually show up.
I'll bring a keg of blood wine, Veronica.
Yeah. Awesome.
So we'll be celebrating Veronica's birthday there as well.
Yeah. First Contact Day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that's pretty awesome.
Very cool. All right.
All right. So tonight we're going to be talking about James Darren and Vic Fontaine. Before we get into that, why don't we take a quick break for a quick promo, and then that way we can spend the rest of the show talking about James Darren, who unfortunately recently passed. But we'll talk about his sort of legacy and career, and also his contributions to Star Trek. So we'll be right back after these messages.
Hi, I'm Gina Shock from the Go-Go's, fabulous drummer of the Go-Go's.
Hi, this is Tony Levin of King Crimson.
Hi, this is David Fishoff of the Rock and Roll Fantasy Camp.
Hi, this is Richard Evans. I am the author of Listening to the Music the Machines Make.
Hi, this is Teresa Kariakis, punk rock photographer.
Hi, I'm Tom Beaujour, author of Nothing But a Good Time, and you are listening to Modern Musicology.
Modern Musicology.
Modern Musicology.
You're listening to Modern Musicology, so, pay attention. You might learn something.
Look up, look down, look out. Here come the monkeys.
Mickey,
David,
Mike,
Peter.
We're talking about them in Monkeying Around. That's right, Monkeying Around has everything, including
interviews,
Episode reviews,
album discussions,
and other incredible surprises.
Monkeying Around, a podcast about the monkeys.
You guys want to know like a fact that I guess I knew intellectually, but it's just surprising to me every time. Vic Fontaine debuted in the 20th episode of DS9 season 6.
Yes.
It was the 144th episode. And then he appeared in that episode in season 6, and then 6 episodes in season 7 for a total of 7 episodes.
And that's it.
And that's it.
That's
I know.
crazy.
I know.
He seems like he has such a big presence in that show because every one of his episodes, he himself has such a big presence.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's phenomenal because you think like, oh, Deep Space Nine, they're going to Vic's all the time. They kept going back to this lounge singer thing. And it's really just 7. I mean, it's fewer episodes in the queue, and it doesn't start until like the very end of the show. And it just feels like he had such a big presence on it. And like you said, a lot of it's because they were very key, pivotal character episodes that he appeared in.
Right.
And he has, if you count another one, it's 8, but he was in the Mirror Universe, but he was just a background character. And that's
weird.
That's a whole other conversation about the Mirror Universe. That was not Vic, but I agree with you, Charles, and what you're saying. It's so funny that when you look at sci-fi, there are famous characters. There's Vedequin, Kai Wynn. Mm-hmm. Crossing the Streams, there's Alfred Bester in DS9, played by Walter Koenig. And you're right. When I looked up the whole thing about Vic Fontaine, I thought he was in way more episodes than this.
Yeah,
I was stunned.
I know.
Right.
So one of our audience members that's joining us is Sci-Fi Queens, and they said, but he had a huge impact on Deep Space Nine.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I think there was also a lot more episodes that he was like mentioned in that he didn't necessarily appear in. So it felt like he was a bigger presence than he was.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I agree with that too. How did y'all feel when you I don't know, did y'all see, well, I guess either way, whether you saw it first run or not, how did you feel when Vic was first introduced, the episode?
That is a very good question, Keith, because I did watch the show first run, and as a one-off thing, it was fine. I did not like him as an ongoing character. every time, and I realize now it was only 7 times, that every time that in the opening credits, when it says James Darren as Vic Fontaine, I would go, oh. But I came to appreciate him enormously, and probably in second run, like the second time I watched everything through. But originally, I just did not care for the whole idea. But I think he's one of the greatest additions to the cast now. And I think that whole concept of having a show set in wartime, it's the perfect addition to the setting. And I just think it was a brilliant stroke. Now, having said that, I was really glad to see James Darren on screen in a Star Trek show. I thought that was great. But and of course, everybody knows he's, part of that whole like Frank Sinatra, Rat Pack kind of scene. And, so what else would he do? And I think it was not originally, but I do think it was a great addition.
Yeah. How about you, Veronica, when you first saw him?
I mean, I don't remember which episode I saw him in originally, but I thought it was cool that there was a hologram that knew they were a hologram. We're just like, yeah, I'm a hologram. All right, let's move on.
Yeah.
Come into my bar. This is my bar. When you're here, I'm live. When you're not here, I'm not. It's all cool.
Yeah.
I was also watching the show original run, and I mean, like Alan said, I was excited that it was James Darren because I knew him from the Time Tunnel, and I was like, that's the guy from the Time Tunnel. Which I'd only watched a few years earlier than that, in the early 90s, because I was a teenager when DS9 was on. But I liked I was sort of into the Rat Pack kind of a thing. There was a resurgence of that in the 90s. Yeah. But I mean, again, like I was less interested by season 7. I wanted the Dominion War storyline more than I wanted, like, you know, Ocean's 11 in the Holosuite. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think for me, because I watched it first, I think what Alan said was true. I was fine with it. I was curious about him, but I think like what Veronica said too is interesting because the very first time they all met him, he was basically saying he's a hologram, and they were kind of whispering at first, like, hey, he knows he's a hologram. He's like, hey, it's cool, Pally. And he was doing all that kind of language. Right. And then he looks at people, he instantly goes, hey, you know, these two are crazy about each other. And he had that. He had insight, and I thought it was cool. And also, like you said, Alan, wartime, that is an absolute tried and true tradition for wartime movies. Of course, the greatest may be Casablanca, where you have some place to go, some bar. Heck, even even Voyager, when they did the 2-parter with the Hirosian, that was a World War II simulation, they had a bar. And they had 7 of 9 as the singer there. So that really goes with a wartime theme to have a place like that.
Right. Right.
They immediately sort of tied in Vic Fontaine with like the character stories that had been going on up to that point. I mean, in his way, it was very much Odo and Kira. But then later on, you had with Nog's storyline in Paper Moon. Yeah. Like they immediately, like when he appears, it's usually not like, oh, we're on a holodeck adventure, although you do also get that. But a lot of times it's, I mean, these sort of deep stories about the characters that you already care a lot about.
It was interesting because in some ways he fulfilled kind of 3 different roles that we're familiar with on this show: the Guinan role, the Data role, and the other one that I just went blank on. The counselor.
Okay.
Because the station doesn't have a counselor, so he becomes that. He sort of becomes that confidant, you know, the one who gives. Because everybody, that whole trope about, you know, you can't tell your wife something, you can't tell your shrink something, but you can tell your bartender something. And he becomes all of those things for this show. And I think he was such a wonderful and complex character.
It's interesting because they already had a bar there at DC9.
Yeah.
And by the time Vic came around, they had a counselor with the exception of his very first episode. So I mean that's interesting because I think he did fill that role for a lot more characters than Quark did, than Ezri did.
Oh yeah, exactly.
And that's a good point. They really could have just introduced a singer who was a regular singer at Quark's.
Yeah,
you know, but I do think that it was effective. The Holosuite thing is effective because it sort of separates it and puts it in this little fantasy universe.
Yes.
But even just as a fan who was interested in the holodeck and that kind of thing, I do think it's interesting that he just from the jump was self-aware.
Yeah.
There was no big like Vic Fontaine discovers he's a Holosuite program. He just from the start knew he was, and they used that in some really interesting ways, especially in Paper Moon when all of a sudden he was on 24/7. And not just to show up and sing a song and then they turn the holosuite off and leave, but he can play cards and do his taxes and, you know, like relax and watch television and things like that.
Right.
And in that way, he and then later the Doctor on Voyager, they are, I don't even know if I should say prescient, but that's because what, you know, technology. I forget. Do you remember that little weird game that came out years ago? It was a little tchotchke kind of thing that you would carry around. It was a little animal or something that lived in it. You have to take care of it. And if you didn't pay attention to it, it would die.
A Tamagotchi?
Yeah, exactly. That's it. Yeah.
Recently, that was in like the early 90s.
Yeah, okay, you're right. Well, time. Wait till you get this age, Veronica. Time flows differently. but that was the thing, Charles. I remember when he was stunned when they turned him on, and he sang this joyous song with that episode when they said you can basically control yourself, and that's also what happened to the Doctor on Voyager. At one point, when he complained to Janeway, he said, "I'd like to be able to turn myself on and off." And then that's when they truly started growing. And we're looking at that now. I was just reading yesterday about yet another guy who's trying to create yet another AI computer. And what he does is he just leaves it on all day long. And the computer just basically surfs the internet and watches television. Now, 10 years from now, maybe it'll nuke us all. But that's kind of the stuff they're trying to do. And that's what they did with him.
Way to have faith in technology, Keith.
No.
I do want to point out one thing. One of the things that a lot of people keep calling AI is actually machine learning. It's not artificial intelligence, because like the machine learning, surfing the internet and watching videos, that's literally the machine learning. The artificial intelligence won't come in and at another, like, I don't know how to explain it.
Stage.
But stage almost seems like the right word, but it's not like it gains all of this knowledge and then suddenly it moves from machine learning to artificial intelligence. I don't know. There's something else.
Yeah.
Well, that's
AI.
I've been listening to one of my my favorite authors, Disney Taylor's Bobaverse book just came out, and there's a whole AI thing.
Well, you're right. To be proper, I should say
brain.
They're trying to create AI by using machine learning.
Right.
And yeah, to your point, it's way more complicated than that. But he and the Doctor continue to grow. What I thought was interesting, we always talk about one thing about not Star Trek, about science fiction is sometimes you just have to go with it. What you were saying, Charles, Veronica, about how he was self-aware. What I love about it, there was no real big background. I don't know where this guy, the Dr. Bashir just literally says, "Hey, I picked up a new program and it's unique." And you just ran with it. That was it. You just ran with it.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
There could be other Vics just like floating around out there.
Yeah.
That are in no way related to our Vic.
Yeah. And something we talked about before on the show is that, they're at a level of technology in the 24th century where they can accidentally create sentience, by saying the wrong thing on the holodeck. You accidentally created a sentient life form. But Vic seemed self-aware and sentient and perfectly happy to be a holodeck program from the start, which is a big jump from like Moriarty, who initially was just a holodeck program and then had to sort of grapple with the idea that he's on a starship and in the future and not real and that sort of thing. Whereas Vic, was aware that he's on Deep Space Nine. He's in the Holo Suite. It's his job to sing the songs and come on in, Pally. Let's have a good time.
Yeah. One of the things I found interesting is Ira Stephen Bear, of course, in so many ways was instrumental in bringing him on the show. And one of the things that I think Vic Fontaine points out is so many things about Deep Space Nine point out is what they were allowed to do once Berman and Braga basically gave up on that show or released the reins and spent their time on Voyager. I've read interviews, this never would happen with Berman and Braga. And that's not even a negative against them. It was a weird kind of experiment. But what was funny was the first people that were proposed by others, the main people that people told Ira to consider were Frank Sinatra Jr., of course, Jerry Vale, Steve Golay, and I love this one, Tom Jones.
Sure.
Well, it's funny, like the original joke was going to be that it was Frank Sinatra Jr. and that Jr. was more famous in the future than Frank Sinatra was. And then Junior didn't want to do it. He wanted to come on and play an alien. And Ira Stephen Bear was like, I can get a million guys to come here and play an alien. I can only get one guy to play Frank Sinatra Jr. But I think it worked out for the best the way it is, because I think that not only did James Darren play it very well, but there's no baggage of it being a real person with a real history. Good point. Vic Fontaine just is Vic Fontaine.
Yeah.
James Darren, he had said when they asked him when his agent told him that they wanted him to come in, and he said, "Nah, this is too much on the nose. I pass." And his agent, he passed, and then his agent called him again because they wanted him. He passed, and again he passed 3 times. And he said finally his agent said, "Will you at least read the script?" And so he read the script, and then he went in to see Ira Stephen Bear, but he's one of those people that doesn't like cold readings. And so instead of basically reading lines from the script, they just started talking, and they would say stuff, and he would talk the way he actually normally talks. And Ira Stephen Bear goes, dude, I just wrote something like that for this character, Vic Fontaine, that speaks just like you spoke. And he's like, okay. And that's how he decided to try it out.
Yeah,
That's
he
great.
seems very comfortable in his own skin playing Vic Fontaine. And it's remarkable. We've talked about Paper Moon before a number of times on the show. We've been doing the show for 3 years. You can't not talk about It's Only a Paper Moon. But it's remarkable in that episode that they handed over to two actors who are playing like not even regular series characters. Like Nog is, you know, a recurring guest star who is like the son of the brother of a main character, right? And then Vic Fontaine, who's and they do such an amazing job. Like when you're watching the show, it doesn't feel weird that it's not like it's like we're watching through Babylon 5 and there's like a random episode where it'll be like two janitors who are the main characters this week. Right. And it feels weird because like the two janitors just feel unnatural being like the leads of Babylon 5. But in Paper Moon, it doesn't feel weird at all because they built up, for one, they built up Nog so well, but also those two they just seem so natural in their roles. Like this isn't the first time they played those roles, but they play them so well. But that episode is so much about those two characters, Nog with what he's been through, but also with Vic Fontaine, sort of surprisingly as you watch it, like I mentioned this just a few minutes ago, but where he's left on all the time and gets to experience life and sort of selfishly wants Nog to stay in the holosuite. It's just a phenomenal episode. And it's just amazing that a television show in the 90s not only went there, but it went so well.
What's interesting about that, though, and I don't remember if we mentioned this the last time we've talked about this episode, but yes, it's an episode that is carried by two guest characters. And the cool thing about it is that if you were thinking write a DS9 episode, you would never think to pair those two characters up. I mean, if you were going to write a Nog episode, you would think of pairing him up with a number of other characters. And for Vic, there's so many things that you could do with him. You would never think to put those two together. And I think that's one of the things that makes that episode so beautiful is that it not only puts the spotlight on two of the I don't want to say minor characters because there are no minor characters in DS9, but two of the lesser frequent, you know, featured players, and given such an in-depth episode, such a good script to deal with, and it's just beautiful. It's just amazing.
Right.
And I'd say also what's so funny about that episode is that whole storyline could fall apart because you have a dude with a Ferengi head on wearing 60s clothes in an Earth, you know, lounge or bar nightclub, and then staying in an apartment that is absolutely decked out like a 60s apartment. And somehow it works. And then James Darren, what you guys are saying, James Darren just makes it work. But then, Charles, you said something last week. I think, well, of course he made it work because he spent a bunch of time acting against silver-skinned aliens in the time tunnel and all kinds of crazy things. So he was just a consummate professional. You never felt that he really thought he was playing at something. He treated it straight up seriously. Whether Worf came into the club, because after something horrible happened in Deep Space Nine, Worf started spending time. There's an actual episode where Worf keeps coming in, asking Vic to sing a sad song, and Vic is literally like, "Dude, I don't want to sing that song again. You're bringing down the entire crowd." But it just works.
Yeah.
And it was his first episode. His Way was a big deal on the show because it was sort of like the Odo Kira episode, right? And they sort of built up Odo Kira for a few seasons at that point. And I mean, it's not a universally popular pairing. You know, like even like Rene Auberginois didn't care for the Odo Kira thing, but I mean, frankly, I didn't at the time either. I liked Odo the way he was, not mooning over Kira. You know what I mean? But I thought that James Darren did such a great job, like playing that, you know, just giving advice to him, and sort of he even missteps along the way and like tricks them into thinking they're both dealing with a holodeck character when it's you know what I mean? Like he's not infallible either. I don't know. I just think it works really well. I like it more now than I did in the 90s when I don't know how old I was 17 or something when this episode came out. I wanted more Dominion War, not Odo mooning over Kira. You know what I mean? But I think it works well now, and I remember not caring for. There's a later episode called Bada Bing Bada Bang, which is basically like Ocean's 11.
Yeah.
Which
Right.
at that point when that season was airing, and I was like, get back to the flipping Dominion, and you know what I mean? Like I don't want to watch them, do a casino heist in the Hollow Suite. But watching it now, I think it's a lot more charming than I thought it was at the time.
Sure. But at the time, you're getting one episode per week, and you have this ongoing storyline, and you're so invested in that ongoing storyline, it's hard to break away from it.
Right.
Our good buddy Wayne has joined the audience, and he says, now that I'm listening to you guys, not only do I want to go back and watch those episodes, I want to go and look up the documentaries that talk about James being added to the cast.
Wow.
Very cool.
Just this week, I watched, or I rewatched, there's an episode of Sierra Lofton's podcast, which the name escapes me at this moment, but where they were talking about his way with Ira Stephen Bear and a non-visitor. And it's a really great conversation, giving a lot of background and sort of what they were experiencing in real time making that episode. So if you look up Sierra Lofton's The Seventh Rule, I think maybe is the name.
That sounds right.
Podcast.
That sounds right, because I have it on my phone.
Yeah, and look up the episode His Way. It's great. We're in a pretty amazing time now where you don't have to wait for a documentary. Like in the 90s, someone had to produce a documentary, but now like everyone's doing YouTube videos and things. And like Sierra Lofton's podcast, it's just a great episode. And obviously he's Sierra Lofton, so he's got the access to getting a non-visitor and Ira Stephen Bear on it.
Right.
But to just be frank and have a conversation like we're having now, except for they were there making that episode.
Right.
Yeah, and Wayne, you were talking about the episodes because he's in his short appearances, some important episodes as His Way, Tears of the Prophet, which is the one with an absolute tragic episode, a sad episode. Image in the Sand, which has to do with the aftermath of that, and Cisco goes on a journey. That's the episode where Worf is demanding he sings this song all the way because Worf is so upset. And I think one of the best ones, and Charles, you're talking about a war episode. I think one of the best ones is the Siege of AR 558.
Right. Yes.
That's the episode where Nog gets injured. And one of the interesting things was Dr. Bashir takes the recording of Vic's music on this trip, and it becomes the music, his singing becomes a backdrop for that war. Another classic from war movies. Yeah. And again, it works.
That's the one for me that really ties Vic Fontaine in with the war. And Alan, like you were talking about, it's sort of a World War II sort of feel where they're listening to Vic Fontaine singing while they're in this, pretty intense war episode.
Yes.
And obviously it ties up directly into the next episode is Only a Paper Moon, or I think it's like 2 episodes later.
Yes.
But where it sort of ties in Nog's storyline, where those episodes weren't back to back, but they really felt like a part 1 and part 2 in a way. But I think that one works really well in the way that you're talking about, where like wartime, World War II, and you think about these sort of 1940s era crooners. But I think that he really sort of fits into that mold there, and I think that works extremely well.
Right. You have those images of the soldier on the front line who, when he has downtime, listens to a recording of those songs and just wistfully thinks about being home with his sweetheart or whatever, and they captured that in Deep Space Nine so well with his character. And I just thought it added whole new dimensions to that whole ongoing war story.
Right. Absolutely.
It added heart. You know what I mean? Like you can get into the ship battles and the gun battles and all that kind of stuff, but that I thought added a lot of like humanity to it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's part of what Deep Space Nine was doing at the time, which was relatively radical, especially for a science fiction show, which was this long form storytelling where you have an arc that is going on for, in their case, years. That was still kind of rare at that time, doing something like that. And he does become a part of that world in an absolute word. I read another thing with him where they talked about what was the plan to bring him on? Was it a one-off or one shot or not? He goes, and he said, I don't know. You'd have to ask Ira Bear about it. He said, I think they were originally thinking of me as maybe 1 or 2 episodes. They didn't mention as many as I did, but it could have been 50 shows and I would have done 50 because I loved playing that character.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
especially now knowing his reticence to take the character on in the first place.
Yeah,
Right.
That's wonderful.
it really is.
Yeah. So, Keith, you sort of mentioned this before.
Mhm.
This is something that I thought was really weird back in the 90s. There was that Mirror Universe episode where Vic Fontaine's just a dude in the Mirror Universe.
Yes.
Right.
Explain that to me and make it make sense. Thanks.
I don't know I don't even know what's about that. It was just, it goes back to where everybody had to be in the Mirror Universe, and they just kind of because spoilers for those who haven't seen Deep Space Nine. Spoilers. But Odo is in the Mirror Universe, and they blowed him up, as somebody says, blowed him up real good.
Yeah, but at least Odo, you would imagine, also exists in that universe.
Well, that's
Why
true.
is Vic Fontaine a dude?
I don't
Like
know.
a flesh and blood guy.
But here's a funny thing. When he was asked in an interview what were his favorite episodes of Deep Space Nine that he did, he mentioned the introduction, His Way. And then he loved Paper Moon. That's his favorite. It's only Paper Moon. And Charles, he said The Emperor's New Cloak was just a lot of fun.
Sure, of course it was.
It probably was because you didn't have to wear a tuxedo under studio.
Yeah. Yeah, I have no idea why he was there. It made no sense. You're right. He was just a random dude. He could have been anybody. He held a couple of laser pistols or whatever, and that was kind of it.
Yeah. It's almost like the people making the show are just like, you know who I like? James Darren down here. I love having James Darren here. Makes zero sense.
Yes.
I didn't know. Maybe that was supposed to be like the Mirror Universe version of his programmer who looked like him. Because we've seen that before with the Doctor.
That's
that sort of
thing.
thing.
A good idea.
Mm-hmm.
I like
better
that.
than what was presented on the show.
Well, sure. I mean, it could have just been an opportunity to have James on and just play a different character or a different slant on the character,
Yeah.
And
No, I
fine.
know. But if you want to have
know.
just James Darren on, just put him in makeup. Like it's Star Trek. You could just slap some bumps on his head and he could be whoever,
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, let's talk about the final episode then, because he was featured in What You Leave Behind.
Yes.
And if you're going to do a send-off to this amazing cast, you have to have him included, and you have to have that final song.
Yeah.
Oh man, it's so good. Was he in the documentary?
I mean, I think so.
I don't think he was he?
Did he not appear as a talking head in the documentary?
I don't remember. I haven't watched it in a while.
What's funny, because the documentary opens with Rom, whose name just fell out of my head.
Max
Grodenchik, like doing the James Darren kind of a thing. Like,
exactly.
Because that kind of music is so associated with Deep Space Nine, even though it appeared at the very end of the series.
Right.
But I feel like he appeared at least as, I don't know if it was like new footage or
maybe it was archival.
But I thought he was great. I was gonna mention that duet he does with Avery Brooks.
Yes.
Which is earlier, like was that Bada Bing Bada Bang, I think.
That's the one.
Yeah.
Because back in the day, back when you used to like do Kazaa and Napster and steal music, and I had a burned CD that was just ripped songs from Deep Space Nine, and that was one of them. Was those two? I mean, for one, Avery Brooks does a great job. You know what I mean? But I mean, those two together, it's just a fabulous duet. And I went through a period from my college years. People get sort of rebellious in their college years, and I was listening to a lot of like Rat Pack stuff. That was me in the 2000s. But I think that holds up along with like Louis Prima and Sinatra and Dean Martin and all that stuff. I think those two, their voices are just wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned it, Charles, because I was that's an interesting episode to me too, because there's a couple of things going on in the episode. First off, I guess most people probably know that Avery Brooks is a real life professor of music from Rutgers University. He is an absolutely trained musician.
Yeah, but I'm sorry to interject, but up to this point, I think the only time we've seen him sing on the show was Alan Moraine. You know what I mean? So as a viewer, it was surprising to see him.
Yes.
Acquitting himself that well.
I equate that to Christina Chong on Strange New Worlds.
I don't think she had anything to do with it.
No,
she was in middle school.
No, but it was the same experience for me because I had never heard her before even though she was establishing.
I got you. Yeah, but we've been watching him for
7 years.
7 years of
Yes.
20 plus episode seasons.
Right.
You know, whereas Christina Chong was singing by her, like, what, 19th episode?
Yeah.
True.
But go ahead, Keith. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, you're right. And it's a good thing. And the other thing that's very interesting about that episode, and this actually came from Avery Brooks, if you remember Bada Bing, Bada Bang, is Avery Cisco did not want to participate in what was basically saving Vic's club. There's a couple of things, or nightclub. There's a couple of things going on there because, as we were saying, because the program and the world that Vic lived in was supposed to be basically realistic and running itself, then Vic was basically dealing with a takeover. And gangsters coming in, and there was a whole thing where Vic is literally ejected from his own club at one point in that episode, and Bashir and O'Brien look into a way to save Vic. And what it boils down to is this is literally fundamentally part of the world that was created, just like real life. You can't turn off real life. And basically they would have to have deleted the entire program to try to basically make sure Vic's life was perfect. And now it's like, but his life is supposed to be real. So I thought that was very interesting. And the other thing that came from Avery Brooks, which was Cisco was talking to Cassidy Yates, because when they wanted to pull off what, like you said, this Ocean's 11 thing, Cisco kept being really resistant to going into the holodeck. And everybody's like, what's the whole suite? And everybody's, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? And Cassidy finally talks to him. And he basically is like, I don't want to play games. Being a black man in that club in the 60s, it's pretend. We wouldn't have been welcome there. Cassidy, you and I would not have been welcome in that club being black people.
Wow.
And I think it's a very interesting thing because she kind of said, Ben, come on, it's a fantasy. And he's like, no, I don't want to pretend for a fantasy. And then he finally gives in, goes in there. And of course, Avery Brooks is kind of like a natural over actor, and he just works so well in that stuff. And then when he gets into it, boy, does he get into it.
See, I don't think that Avery Brooks and William Shatner are over actors. I think everyone else is an under actor.
Well, that's a good point. Yeah, he's a big, I shouldn't say and I should not say he's a big actor because he is. Yeah, he is absolutely he's a theatrical actor. You're right. I should not call him an over actor. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, and I thought that was a really good addition because that was something, during that time frame, like I said, there was a resurgence of Rat Pack stuff, and I sort of got into the Rat Pack during that time. This is late 90s, early 2000s when I was sort of getting into it. But that was something that would be pointed out a lot, would be that like Sammy Davis Jr. is allowed to perform at the Sands. He could not attend there as a patron.
Right.
Right.
So, but I think that's really interesting that they acknowledged it on the show, because there's a lot of shows that wouldn't have done that, wouldn't have gone there. And I think that, I commend them for it.
Right.
Oh, yeah. And that was Avery Brooks again. He wanted something like that, just mentioned. And some people may think that's silly, like, oh, come on, it's a fantasy from get-go. But I think it's very important and interesting, that he did that.
Yeah. Well, it's an important thing I think to remind the audience of, because they're not whitewashing or erasing the history. At least like mentioning it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly.
But then, I think something that Vic Fontaine did really well, and I sort of just thought about this as we were talking, there's a lot of you see sort of like Sinatra or Dean Martin pistaches on TV shows that are just like cheesy. You know what I mean? But I feel like the way that James Darren played it, he feels like he could have been a performer in the 60s, right? It doesn't feel like he's a guy doing a cheesy Frank Sinatra impression. And I think that's, it's, for one, it's hard to do. Part of it is because he's from that era. He was younger than obviously Vic Fontaine would have been during that era. But I think that he sort of brings like a naturality to it that I think, there's a lot of shows that would do like the Frank Sinatra episode, and it's a guy doing a bad Frank Sinatra. But I don't think Vic Fontaine ever feels that way to me. Right.
No, I agree with that. So do we want to talk a little bit about some of James's other roles, particularly Time Tunnel?
I would love to.
Because we only got about 10 minutes left. So I would like to kind of, have a picture of his whole career.
Yeah, good idea.
So Chuck, take it away. Talk about Time Tunnel.
Well, the Time Tunnel episode that always comes to my mind is, and forgive me on the episode title because I haven't watched the Time Tunnel all the way through in a long time, but the episode where they go back to Pearl Harbor. And and it turns out Tony was a kid during Pearl Harbor. His dad disappeared. So they went to a lot of different time periods. Like there was good episodes where they were like in biblical times or in like Abe Lincoln times and that sort of thing. But specifically the Pearl Harbor episode was very personal for the characters, but also for the audience, because that was, I mean, living memory. You know, that was 24 years earlier or something like that. That people remember that time, and it was something that was very personal because he was there as a kid and investigating his father while these events of Pearl Harbor was going on. I think it's just it was like the day the sky fell or something like that. I'm not going to be like
That's it.
Live on air, but
the day the sky fell in.
It's a phenomenal episode.
Yeah, it is.
That's the one that always springs to my mind, more so than later on. Like I said, there were silver aliens, and I'm sure at some point, and they met Abe Lincoln, all that kind of stuff. But I think where Time Tunnel really worked was, you know, dealing with the personal history of the character and allowing him to deal with sort of the loss of his father, but also this traumatic event that, you know, wasn't that long ago for the people watching the show in 1966.
Yeah, I remember that so well too. That is a powerful episode. There was also another one that it was kind of obvious, but they ended up on the Titanic, which was, of course they did.
I think that was the first one. Wasn't the first one they go to the Titanic?
Yeah,
like their first like time jump.
I think you're right. And what I did like about that, what stood out for me outside of everything else about the Titanic, was it was this really weird thing when they've been talking to the captain of the Titanic, and at one point he finally says, "It occurs to me, if you're really from where you say you are, you know whether or not I'm going to die tonight." And Doug looks at him and said, "Yes, sir, I'm afraid you are." That was really kind of intense for 1960 science fiction. Right. To just tell that man that he was about to die. And again, like what we're saying is they just played it so straight. And that's what you do with science fiction or fantasy. You just play it straight. And it's so weird that the guy who was Moondoggy, this heartthrob with Gidget, was on a science fiction show like that and playing it so straight. And I bought it.
Right.
Just bought it.
Yeah.
And I want to point out, because this is something that I didn't realize until I started reading up a little bit on him after his passing, is that he had guest starred in an episode of Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. And that's where Irwin Allen, he came to Irwin's attention. And it was after that they connected. And it was after that he cast him in the lead of his next show, Time Tunnel.
Wow.
And I think that's really, really, I know it. Now I want to go back and watch. I don't think I've ever watched all the way through of Bottom of the Sea. And I kind of really want to now. And I want to see James's episode of it.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Like all the Irwin Allen shows, Bottom of the Sea starts off very like serious sort of espionage, like early 60s black and white spycraft and stuff going on.
Yep.
And then by the end, it's like sea dragons and gnomes, but there is a really good Vincent Price puppet episode where like the living dolls, where the puppets are like the antagonist. Way before Buffy did it, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea had a puppet episode.
Right.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, we will have to do this one day. Charles, what you said: Lost in Space, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, Time Tunnel, and Land of the Giants. If you look hard enough, you'll even see the exact same costumes and monsters and creatures used between the episodes.
They reuse things all the time, because why wouldn't you? It's a cost-cutting thing. And because the production was so fast, you used what you had on hand.
Yeah. Right. You know, something else. Go ahead, Charles. I'm sorry.
I was going to say they all sort of follow the same arc, where they start off as kind of a serious sci-fi show.
Absolutely.
Not getting the audience. And so they just ramp the camp as the show goes on. And the Time Tunnel was only a 1-season show, so that arc is very compressed. Where it took like Lost in Space 3 years to get to the vegetable planet. Like Time Tunnel gets there by the end of season 1.
Yeah, and they tried to revive the Time Tunnel, but you know, if there's ever a series that could do it a modern retelling, because it also had an incredible cast around them. That cast was roundly good, and frankly, a whole bunch of them were Star Trek. A couple of them were Star Trek veterans as well.
Yeah, you got people like Whit Bissell and Lee Merriweather, like the people back at base that are reacting to what's going on. Like, that's a phenomenal cast right there.
Right.
And
so I don't know. I never watched TJ Hooker. I don't know if any of y'all did.
On and off.
Yeah.
I didn't watch it, but I've seen it.
Big hair.
Yeah. He was Corrigan? Was it Callahan? Corrigan? Something like that was James Darren's character on. He was like the younger guy than TJ, you know?
Yes. Yeah. But he did guest appearances on things like Love American Style, Policewoman, Charlie's Angels, Police Story, Hawaii Five-0, The Love Boat, Fantasy Island. I mean, what a career that guy had.
Veronica, I wonder how many of those you've seen.
Yeah. Unfortunately, Veronica had to bail because she's fighting a cold, and so she.
Sorry to hear that.
She ejected from the podcast.
Alan, something you said was interesting. I didn't realize till I researched is this was literally a guy who did everything. He had a pretty decent directing career, and I didn't realize he did a lot of directing on T.J. Hooker.
Yes,
didn't know that. Yeah, I know, right?
I didn't either until I was doing my reading up this past week. Yeah. That was a thing that I discovered there.
Yeah. I mean, he's a career that lasted from the 50s up until like basically now. You know, like I mean, he had a phenomenal run, and the fact that he was so like his story is like tied up with Star Trek before he even gets to Star Trek, because Time Tunnel was one of those 60s sci-fi shows, and there weren't that many of them. Right. And then obviously he co-starred with William Shatner on T.J. Hooker, all before he winds up on Star Trek. So he's sort of like his whole career is sort of like not far off from Star Trek.
And then an absolute true film actor in the Gidget movies, which nowadays some people who don't know now may not know of them. The Gidget movies were ridiculously popular back in the day.
Right.
That was a huge thing back in the day. Moondoggie used to be kind of a joke. I mean, that name, Moondoggie, it's like Maynard from Dobie Gillis, which I know I'm really going far back. But yeah, I mean, he had so many careers: singing career, acting career, directing career. He just had a lot of, and we mentioned this recently. I listened to him, and I think it was on Connor Trenier and Dominic Keating's show, the one before they had the shuttle pod. And the thing was, you just listen to him talk. That was who he was. He was talking to him. He said, "Yeah, man, it was cool, baby." And he would just say all this stuff because he was from South Philly. So of course he sounded like that back in the day. That's who he was. He was cool.
Yeah. And I do want to talk really quickly about his singing career, because we've talked about him being in that Rat Pack kind of scene.
Yeah.
His first single came out in 1958.
Wow.
And his first album came out 2 years later in 1960, and he recorded, I mean, all the way through his career. Like the last album that he put out was a live album that came out in 2019.
Wow.
So he was recording for quite a long time, in addition to all the acting and directing that he did.
That is amazing.
He's an impressive guy.
And Wayne, for you, following up on what Alan just said, if you want to even think about his music, Wayne, in 1999, he released an album called This One's from the Heart. And it's all of his Deep Space Nine tunes.
That's right.
That he sang, starting with The Best Is Yet to Come, ending with Satin Doll. And so if you want to kind of get a taste of his sound, that's a good album. And if you've watched Deep Space Nine, and you really should, it'll kind of
we do. You may have jumped a little ahead, because we got these two comments from him. He says, "I have the entire Time Tunnel series on my hard drive. I'm not gonna miss the streaming services at all." And he says, "The thing that I found amazing about James Darren is, like Dick Clark, he didn't seem to age at all."
That's true.
Yeah,
that's true. Yeah, he was eternally young. I found one last thing real quick. I end my part of it on this. I was reading an interview with him, with James Darren. This was just back from just only 5 years ago, 2019. And he said this when he talked about Deep Space Nine. He said, "What You Leave Behind" was also one of his episodes. He said the finale was hard to do. The cast had been there forever. It was hard for them. And it was actually hard for me too, because my relationship with that group had grown instantly. I loved that cast. When it was ending, it was sad. I'd sing that song, "The Way You Look Tonight," to Nana Visitor, and she'd start crying, and I'd start crying. It was tough getting through it. I loved that show and those people.
Oh, that's so sweet.
It is amazing.
That sounds like a good ender.
Absolutely. So Keith, where can people find more of you?
On X and on Facebook, primarily the ESO Network Facebook groups.
And how about you, Alan?
CosmicCreative.com, KOZMIC creative.com.
Yep. And you can always find Veronica and I at feltnerdy.com or at feltnerdy across social media. Or if you like adult puppetry content, you can follow us at Felt Nerdy and Dirty. We have a show coming up October the 13th at the Red Light Cafe here in Atlanta. That's going to be an adult only show. It's going to be a fun time. Those tickets are available now. You can search for them on Eventbrite. It's called the Dirty Weirdo Show, Felt Nerdy Showtime Theater, and it's going to be as advertised, dirty and weird. So get your tickets for that. That's 3 p.m. on October the 13th. But also you can find us at the Monkeying Around podcast, where we've got some actually really fun interviews coming up with people who I don't want to spoil. So follow Monkeying Around. We want a little bit of a hiatus to get ready for our Dragon Con shows and so forth, but we're going to be back with a vengeance here pretty soon. Does anyone have a closing for us this week?
Oh gosh, I didn't even think about that.
Well, no, none of us thought to, and usually Veronica doesn't think to.
I know. So how about it's only a paper moon?
It is.
I heard it in the background. That was great.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. You can join us every Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern. We go live on YouTube talking about the latest Star Trek, when there's new Star Trek, or a legacy Star Trek topic. That's 8 p.m. Eastern on Thursdays on YouTube. And you can follow us after the fact on your favorite podcast platform. Thanks for joining us, everybody.
Yeah. And do we have a topic for next week?
I don't know.
Okay, fine. It'll be a surprise for the audience and for us too.
And for us.
All right, everybody take care. Have a good week. See you next Thursday.
Bye.
Bye.